Good evening, and welcome to Dancing Conversation, Changing the Rules. My name's Christy Bolingbroke. I'm the Executive Artistic Director for the National Center for Choreography here at the University of Akron. I'm really excited to welcome our artist guest this evening to talk a little bit about what does it mean to change the rules. And just to remind all of you, why do we have these dancing conversations? It's not a place to seek out answers, but rather a place to ask more questions. I believe that dance is a way of processing the world at large, and by taking ourselves out of the studio, out of the proscenium theaters, and being able to pair it up against other fields of study, we actually learn more, not just about dance, but also about ourselves and our other fields. So why not then welcome Monica Bill Barnes and Company, who has made it their own goal to take dance where it doesn't belong. As part of tonight's video, we're going to actually show a couple of different clips, and all of this is in anticipation of Dance Cleveland's presentation of Monica Bill Barnes and Company later this month. This first video that we're going to tee up is actually what some might call a breakout work in Monica's canon, and it was a production in collaboration with Ira Glass, and the title is 3 Acts, 2 Dancers, 1 Radio Host. Here we go.
I'm Ira Glass for This American Life. What's this show? Well, I tell stories, they dance. Stories about love and losing those you love, and about what it is like to dance for a living. And they pull out all the stops.
Like every trick I have.
Sparklers.
Rain curtains, sparklers.
Batons.
Batons.
And yes, we know nobody listens to my radio show thinking, you know what this needs is some dancers. Nobody sits through a dance show thinking, you know what this needs is a guy talking and playing clips of audio. But we brought down the house at Carnegie Hall. This, I'll be completely sincere, is one of my favorite things I have ever been part of.
Friends everywhere, please join me in welcoming Monica Bill Barnes to the conversation. Monica Bill Barnes is a choreographer, performer, and the artistic director of Monica Bill Barnes and Company. Barnes founded MBB&Co. in 1997 with a collection of solos that could be performed anywhere. In 2013, MBB&Co. gave itself the challenge to bring dance where it doesn't belong, and has been striving to follow this self-imposed motto ever since. The company has performed in venues ranging from Upright Citizens Brigade to the Sydney Opera House, and has been presented in more than 100 cities throughout the U.S. and internationally. Barnes has worked in film, theater, and set over 30 different works on college students all over the country. Monica, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us. It's really nice to be here.
Yes, and to finally have a conversation. You know, I had fangirled out a little bit as we were preparing and shared, like, I remember seeing your show with Ira and even seeing your work long before that in a whole other form. I think it was a quartet of female dancers. And I'm really curious, for those that this might be their first introduction to your work, it's still one of the scariest invitations we can make to people is come to my dance show. Because they don't know what that means, right?
Yeah, and maybe they've had a bad experience, so
maybe
it can be a lot. Yeah.
So I'm really curious how would you describe to someone your choreographic aesthetic, or your, does dance training come into that? Like, how do we unpack this broad definition of dance on your terms?
Oh gosh. I mean, I'm a classically trained dancer, like so many dancers in America. I started at a small school, like a local studio, and then continued to train through college. So I feel like so many of us dancers share a really common vocabulary. But in making shows and in creating choreography, I feel like I'm trying to use all the skills that I have as a trained dancer to to create performances that feel really relatable to people who aren't trained as dancers. That there's a lot of technique within the performance, but that technique is sort of buried. So I may like try and choreograph like a trip or a stumble on exactly the same place in the music to happen exactly the same every time, but the hope is that actually looks quite spontaneous, and then to try and put some of those like very familiar gestures or awkward moments or things that feel true to life, and to then try and put those right next to some bigger, more unexpected dance moves, but to kind of keep the audience feeling like feeling surprised by the movement, that they're not quite sure. It's not ballet, it's not traditional concert dance, that it sort of lies somewhere in between, but mostly feels like you can kind of have moments of feeling like, oh my gosh, I've done that, or I've sort of gone too far in that way as well. A lot of the humor in the work sort of relies on really attempting maybe more than you should. And
yeah.
Yeah.
I love this idea too, that you pointed out specifically the choreographed stumbles, as opposed to how overly polished a lot of times work can be. We expect it to be all about the tricks and things, but how you're embracing the humanness in the movement design, which is really something key, I think, to focus on. Is it also that humanness that has you interested in taking dance out to museums and bars and in alternative places where it doesn't belong? Where did that come from exactly?
Well, that phrase, 2013, is when Robbie and I started working together, and we were at that moment. I feel like every 10 years you sort of reread the company mission statement, and you think like, what were we thinking 10 years ago? And we were at that point, and Robbie and I were just talking about it and trying to understand something that it's always feels so challenging to say something that can feel true about the work you've made, about the work you're making, and then about the work that you hope to make in the future, and to try and capture that in a phrase. And Robbie just said, what about bringing dance where it doesn't belong? And it just has felt like such a perfect way of introducing what we're hoping to do with our shows to audiences. And so often people will say the phrase back to us, so it feels like that's such a nice response to sort of understand that it makes some sense, and it's memorable, and it's and has some sense of clarity, even if that doesn't mean, even if it feels like you're not sure what exactly that means. It feels like it sort of hints at some effort to question some of the traditions or some of the forms.
Well, and I think it's that questioning of traditions or forms that also informed part of the title for this discussion about changing the rules, which we talked is a very conscious choice. It's not about breaking the rules, but changing them. So I'm curious, how do you even identify or realize the governing rules that you're trying to change or bend? Where does that come from a little bit? Because it's not like we have an actual rule book for every place. Some of them are just more implied over time.
Yes, yeah. I think so often, I mean, I feel like it's really trying to understand what the expectations might be, or when somebody says like like you began, like, please come to my dance show, and that there can be just sort of an immediate association with what that evening is going to be. And so I think oftentimes we're trying to take an audience's expectations, either an expectation of a space, like when you come to a museum, you sort of expect some reverence and quiet, or when you go to a bar, you sort of expect some chaos, and sort of to take something that feels like we can trust the audience will come in with some assumptions, and then how to sort of manipulate and alter those assumptions to the purpose of, serving a broader experience that the show's trying to offer. But, I think so often when a show succeeds, when an audience is really moved or really finds something funny, that's just a real skillful act of manipulation. And I think that you can only do that when you have some sense of what people are, where they're beginning, what they're hoping for, or what they imagine they're getting. And I think a lot of the rules of sort of what should or shouldn't be on stage, or what we're used to seeing when we think of dance shows, I think oftentimes we're using that as a place to respond from, and to sort of, I don't know, it feels more fun to be surprised. If you really imagine something would go one way, there's a lot of joy and nervousness that you can gain from turning it in another direction. And I think we really love that. Every company show, I think, take some really unexpected turns, and that a lot of that is the sort of joy or humor of it.
Yeah, I mean, you use the word manipulation, and I do think that is part of the bending and changing and flexing. But it reminds me of is a term in literature, or one that's becoming more used, is creative nonfiction. Right? Like, remember when there used to be fiction and nonfiction sections? Like, of course, the nonfiction was the boring, the facts and the figures, and then the creative would be the more fiction. So this idea that you could take the known, or even almost like Seinfeld-esque, the mundane, and use it to tell a story in an unexpected way. That has that special, it's not just creative fantasy fiction, but also that we could take the reality of being human and life, and make that visible in dance, which so oftentimes, it can be a very esoteric, abstract form in some ways. And so there's such an invitation and relatability in your work. I'm curious how each piece, like if you learned something in that first work with Ira many years ago, and like we're friends, I just used his first name, with Ira Glass, and how that has, become one of your tools moving forward, or is it a completely blank slate and you're like, where's a new place, new rules? We get to write this from the ground up. But how do you feel that you may be sort of riffing off of each work, or building out some sort of trajectory, or are you not?
No, I think I feel, so often we're performing the work that we've made 3-4 years ago, that we're touring that work while we're making something new. So I think we're constantly informed. And for our own, for our own genuine interest, I think we're always trying to make something that feels different from the piece we made before, that there's just an interest in pushing yourself as a performer and as a creative person, that you as soon as you feel like you're really repeating yourself, I think you start to lose interest. And it's interesting. I feel like so much of working with Ira stays with me. The biggest piece was using language, and before we worked together, I just I don't have an impulse to bring language, just to use language, period. But I am so drawn to language, and I think in so many ways my desire to have collaborators is to have people who can bring ideas and skills that I don't have, but I admire, and I'm just so excited by. So, I think even the museum I feel like, we really felt like the museum was a collaborator in that piece in particular. but it was interesting. I really, Ira and I met and worked first in a collaboration with a writer, David Rakoff, who was also a dancer. And I feel like David embodied sort of both of our skill sets, both Ira's and mine. And we really just, we loved working collaboratively with David and making something. And I think that really felt like for both of us that it gave us some confidence that we could find some common ground, even though our skills don't, there's no overlap between radio and dance, which, we were really painfully aware of when we started and kind of thought, how will this ever like manifest into a show? But it was a really wonderful process to find our way. And, I think, that we didn't imagine that show would really have the life that it ended up having. I also feel so grateful to the other collaborators in that show, Anna Bass, who danced with me for so long, and Kelly Hansen and Jane Cox, who are my sort of founding members of the company and our designers. And I feel like they've always pushed me to try and understand, how are people going to relate to this? Not dancers, not artists, not theater goers, but, how does the work make sense to someone who, maybe doesn't see much theater or dance? And they both come from a theater world. And so I think having that as the foundation conversation in building the company was also something that's so informative, and so much of it, ultimately makes sense why Robbie Saenz de Viteri and I started working together. I know you're going to speak to him.
Yeah. Before we bring Robbie in, I wonder if you can help us tee up one more clip, and do what you can with language, and then we'll let the clip and the dance speak for itself. But we're going to take a look at Happy Hour. What else can you tell our viewers about this work?
So this is an immersive show that when you walk into the room, it's like it's not even like, it is actually just walking into an awkward office party, and there's drinks and there's popcorn being popped in a microwave, and Robbie is the hosting the event and sort of welcoming you and handing you a drink, and you're a part of a community immediately. And then two women come in, and we're dressed like men, and we just crash the party and take this very familiar environment of being in an office party, and then the show really just unfolds with these two like sort of overconfident guys who clearly aren't guys at all, and they sort of blunder through and take you through a whole experience that really raises a lot of issues about gender and what behavior is acceptable, and what we sort of, how we see things through the eyes of how what different genders make you notice. And we're it's one of my favorite shows to perform. It's incredibly, I mean, there's just moments where you see the audience just cringe. But it also sort of is in an effort towards a lot of fun as well.
Awesome. Great. Thank you for that, Monica. I know we're going to bring you back later as well, but after this trailer, we'll bring back Robbie first. So here is Happy Hour. That was Happy Hour with Monica Bill Barnes and Company, and one of MBB and Co.'s collaborators, Robbie Saenz de Viteri, is with us now. Robbie began working in theater as an audio script assistant to Anna Devere Smith. He has created performances and toured productions throughout the world with the Obie Award-winning Nature Theater of Oklahoma. He has created and performed in Happy Hour, The Museum Workout, One Night Only, Days Go By, Keep Moving, and it's 307 Again with Monica Bill Barnes and Company. Together, Monica and Robbie's work has been honored by the Bessies and the Lilly Awards, celebrating women in theater. Robbie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It means a lot to me that you guys invited me to do this, as the non-dance person in a dance company who's creating the shows and performing in the shows with Monica. It's often very hard to understand what I'm doing or why I'm here. So it's really fun to be part of a conversation. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. And Monica alluded to this a little bit, that what she appreciates is in what collaborators bring for skill sets that are not a part of her toolkit. So I'm curious, with your own background, we were talking earlier about devised theater. And for those that maybe aren't in the world of theater, how is devised theater different than, say, other forms of theater?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, I feel like 15 years ago, when I first moved to New York and I was doing it, I don't think the term existed. So I don't even totally know that I'm using it correctly, but I hopefully am. But to me, I think it really means theater that's not created solely from a playwright and a director. It's not like a playwright sits down and says, I imagine these characters talking around this table or something like that. It actually comes from just multiple other places. You mentioned Anna Devere Smith, who was a total hero of mine, who I had the complete pleasure of working for a few months when I first moved to New York. And all of her shows are created from interviews. So she goes into these sort of social hotbed areas and issues and interviews people and creates the shows entirely. The scripts are from real people's words. And that's actually been a kind of trend in my work for the past 15 years, is really using real people's voices and real people's stories on the stage. So that's sort of what I mean by devised theater. I think there's a lot of companies, like a great company in Philadelphia named Pig Iron, that I think really make devised work that, it's not like they're sitting down to write a whole script. They're actually using their bodies and the spaces that their bodies are in to try to figure out what story should we tell here,
Well, and part of that balance too, I think, Monica also acknowledged how much she loves language, but there's a reason that she's also a choreographer and movement is her language. So it sounds like language might be part of what you also bring to the party. And I'm curious, which comes first in your experience of work, whether it's, I'm thinking about the museum workout, which features Myra Kalman's voice and stories that are being told. But, there's always a question, even with music and dance, is there a secret dance that needs to be unlocked from every piece of music, which implies the music comes first? Or did someone go into a studio in silence and make something, and then we found a sound score to go on top of it? What's been your process?
It really changes for every show. And I think it also changes for every piece of every show. I think there are real moments in some of our work where Monica will choreograph something, and I feel like it gives me an idea to write something that really goes with that choreography. Or similarly, I think the reverse also happens. And then I think the wonderful thing that we both, I'm pretty sure, love, but that's not to say that it's not always easy, is that I think both kind of push each other around in a really good way. That there's a moment, I think, if we're trying to make a piece and it has something I wrote in it and something that Monica choreographed in it, that the dancing actually rejects some of the writing, and the writing makes some of the dancing not make sense. And you kind of have to throw something out or rework something in order to really make the collaboration and the whole thing make sense, which to me is just such a wonderful way to work. I mean, I feel like it really makes you really articulate in a way that I really love.
San Francisco-based choreographer Joe Good has famously said, everyone knows dancing and talking cancel each other out. Right? So that there's this inherent tension between both of your skill sets, and that
Yeah.
you're always playing with that. Now, I know Monica got Ira Glass to move in that particular production, and when has she gotten you to move?
You mean to dance?
To dance, physically so, yeah.
It hasn't happened. There was one moment in like the very beginning of the pandemic when we were all lost, all not really knowing what to do, where I learned maybe about 20 seconds of choreography, and made a video of it, and we tried to put those together, with her dancing it in one side of the screen and me dancing it on the other side of the screen, and no one will ever see that.
We call that spectacular failure in the creative process. Yes. Or positive failure.
Yeah.
Tried that once, for sure. There is a sense, and this is where I wonder that devise may come through in the moment, especially because, with this upcoming show, the running show, there is a sort of sportcaster quality. And how much of it is spontaneous as far as being devised in the moment versus set? What is it about that sort of tension with timing?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great thing about, I think, working together, is that we both have the exact opposite impulse towards this. Like, I want everything to sort of be made in the moment in front of the audience in a funny way, and for it to be really live and responsive, and for it to change all of the time. And of course, Monica is a choreographer and a dancer, so everything, every little like moment of each step is just rehearsed so much.
Even stumbling, she told us.
Even stumbling, yeah. And actually, I think the stumbling is such a great example, because I feel like, she'll choreograph these stumbles and trips into things. And I think unless the show has told the audience that it's like a real event, that it's happening live, and that some things might go wrong, you would read that stumble or trip as a choreographed stumble or trip. And it's not funny, or it's not sad, or you kind of just like, oh, she was really good at that. But I think if the show really kind of puts you and the audience on the edge of like not knowing, was this rehearsed? Is this really just happening in front of me? Then those moments of spontaneity in the choreography really land as events, So I don't know. I think, it's not like the running show that you're talking about is entirely spontaneous. A lot of it's scripted, but there are a lot of moments when I am talking about performers and I'm saying something that I haven't said about them on stage before, or I may have written something like right before we went on stage. And that's pretty true in all of our shows for the past few years. I think a lot of it, we bring a lot of that sort of improvisatory nature to our work to try to, keep the audience wondering what's real, what's happening, that's been rehearsed, and what's actually just really happening here.
Or even in happy hour, because you're sort of the host and speaking directly to the audience and often guiding them through those experiences too. It's in some ways providing a voice that dance doesn't always have, because we exist on the movement, and very rarely do dancers talk in most dance, not exclusively, only. But so it's interesting to have that sort of added, note or combination as part of it.
Which to me feels like such an extension of Monica's choreography. I mean, when the first time I saw her work, I just felt like it felt like theater. I didn't sort of read it as dance in the way my mind traditionally thinks of dance. To me, I felt like she was a woman on stage telling a really funny story, and the story was told through movement. So I feel like, there's a lot of, I think, permission that her choreography and the way that she wants to work kind of gives towards language and story.
Yeah. Before we bring Monica back, we're going to watch one more clip, The Running Show. And this is of an upcoming production that's coming to Akron soon. Could you help us set it up?
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So the running show is a show that we actually remake every time we do it. We arrive on Monday and we get a group of people together that we haven't met before. And by Friday or Saturday, hopefully Saturday, we do a show with them. And it's usually about 20 to 25 people. It involves a large group of college age dancers. It involves one younger dancer, someone who's about 12 years old, and a dancer in their 70s or 80s. And this show is really kind of a live physical documentary about the life of a dancer and what it means to make that to fall in love with dance, you know, at a young age, at like 7 years old, and what it means to pursue it in college, to really start to study it and take it seriously, towards, you know, trying to make it a profession, and then to kind of jump forward in time and understand what it means to keep dancing into your 70s or 80s, well past the time when most people have stopped dancing. So yeah, I interview everyone we work with in the show. Monica choreographs and performs with everyone we work with in the show. So you hear their voices and their stories as you see their bodies kind of like living this life of a dancer.
I love that. All right. When we come back, we'll have both Monica and Robbie in conversation. Until then, let's check out this running show clip.
All right. Thank you.
When you go to a stadium or you watch a game on TV, you're watching movement. Movement with a lot of stakes, with everything on the line. Movement made by people who've trained their whole lives for this moment. That's how we want our audience to feel when they come to the running show. Okay, can you tell me your name?
Hi, I'm Monica Bill Barnes.
And how old are you?
I just turned 47.
And when did you start dancing?
I started dancing when I was 7 years old.
The Running Show is a live documentary about the life of a dancer and what it means to fall in love with dance at a young age and to pursue it professionally and to keep moving for as long as we can.
We work with different dancers in every city. We remake the show every time we do it. We start rehearsing on Monday, and if we all do our jobs well, by Friday, we're ready to give you the best 62 minutes we can.
That was a trailer of The Running Show, and that production is coming to Akron on Saturday, September 25th, presented by Dance Cleveland and the University of Akron at E.J. Thomas Hall. And I'm excited that we get to talk some more with Monica and Robbie now. Hey, y'all.
Hi again.
Back for more. Fantastic. Not that that's all about the pandemic anymore, but you did make another piece with your work on The Running Show. And I feel like that's another example of you sort of iterating on top of your process together to keep making in new ways. Would one of you like to tell us what was Keep Moving? How was that the same as The Running Show? How was that different?
I mean, I'll say just it feels so profoundly different. I mean, as everything I think for performing artists was in this time of really shifting to being online. So I think from our like process to what we ended up sharing with an audience, it just felt different at every level. But the experience of sort of having this shared live in-person time together in making and performing The Running Show really made it possible for us to make this really profound shift that honestly I think we're both so surprised like worked. Mm-hmm. If that feels fair.
I mean, it didn't surprise me at all. If anything, light bulbs and fireworks went off because I had seen your earlier work. And contrary to a lot of dance artists who, you know, just, we got to put a video on, we have to put it online, you took the format, it almost was like a performance podcast. It was in short, digestible bites. A lot of that sort of radio work, I think, absolutely inspired it. And then those moments, I was so reminded, because there is a section in the work with Ira Glass, the performance where he shared, you want to know what dance is like on the radio, and all the lights went dark in the theater. And that's right? Like, we can't see people dance on a radio. That's why there aren't a lot of dancing radio shows. And here was a moment, an opportunity in Keep Moving, that in this podcast's performance series, I think there were two chapters or sections where you gave the audience such permission and invited us to actually leave our computers, to stand up, to walk away, just to listen. And that to me was one of those brilliant iterative moments that I don't think you could have done live. The running show doesn't have any moments where we sit in the dark in silence, does it? I mean, I don't want to give anything away, but.
No. Yeah. I mean, Keep Moving also just took a very sort of one piece of the running show essentially and kind of expanded upon it, which is when we do the running show, we get a cast of college dancers. And so as we developed it in New York, we worked with this amazing group of women from Hunter College, which is one of the city colleges in New York. And they took an excerpt of the show to Fall for Dance at City Center with us. And we just loved working with them so much. And when the pandemic hit, we just thought about them as so many of them were about to graduate and so many of them were about to start their careers in dance. And I think there's a really useful thing to do, I think, for all of us to really kind of zoom in on one person's life or one kind of type of life and see how it kind of made its way through the pandemic, and to kind of really spend some time asking, like, what does it mean to graduate with a degree in dance when every theater is closed? And one of the students, Catherine De La Cruz, who's in the show a lot, in Keep Moving a lot, says it's like being launched into nothing. And I just felt like we really latched onto that, and that felt like such an important story to tell.
Yeah. Well, and so much that's a part of the running show also reflects on, what a dancer or any athlete's career is like, because it's as long as your facility, your body can keep doing the thing that you love and that you are dedicating yourself to. And I really appreciate how that's pointed out. But I wanted to circle back to something you brought up earlier, just a little bit, Monica, and that's how gender plays a role in that. How does gender and the idea of the aging body play a role in the running show or in your ongoing choreographic research?
Wow. That's such a wonderful question. I feel like, gosh, it feels so huge. I mean, I think that there's so much that we're, in that the whole history of the company's work is really sort of questioning what it is to see women move on stage, and wonderfully there's sort of an endless way to do that. And I think like with the running show, that we're exploring what that means in terms of comparing them to athletes, which I think so often the most popular televised version of that is that you're seeing male athletes, and so asking an audience to just identify with dancers in the same way that they do with athletes. I mean, I love that. Back to Keep Moving, the first chapter where Robbie says, like, this is where I actually want you to just listen, and you're just listening to this longer, edited interview with one of the dancers, and getting to know her life, and then how that so profoundly informs the next chapter. You see her perform this solo, and I think because you've just spent 20 minutes with her, understanding who she is and what it means for her to decide to be a dancer, that you are able to see so much more in her dancing. Whereas if you had just sort of seen it, I think it would be really easy to, think like, she seems good. or you know, but because of the backstory and you know, the just understanding more about her as a person, you just see so much more in her movement. And I think in one way or another, you know, even with Happy Hour, where we're sort of doing these moves, but we're dressed up in these kind of ill-fitting business suits, and we're asking you to kind of pretend along with us that we're men, even though we don't really look like men, you know, that we're sort of recontextualizing movement, and we're asking you to consider, you know, within that movement, I think also behavior, you know, sort of what are we expecting from gender? And I feel like, I mean, there's this wonderful time that Robbie and I were both talking about a show that we were making, and it was for this amazing theater, the WP Theater, which is, you know, really focused on like women's work and sort of, and it was Robbie who said, like, well, so much of the show we're actually dealing with gender, and it was so funny, and I had just been like talking and talking and talking, and I think there's a way in which like Robbie's just was able to bring a certain kind of attention to something that feels so feels like something that I'm really conscious of, sort of representation as who I am and how I've sort of tried to represent myself. And then, you know, because I'm put myself in a lot of the work, and there's just a way in which I feel like, because we're actually in a conversation together about gender, we're able to reveal to each other and ultimately through the work so much more, you know, or and hopefully to sort of ask an audience to back to that idea of like, what assumptions or expectations are you not even aware that you're bringing?
Yeah, I love that sort of is actually about dance. Yeah, I think you were talking about it earlier about dance. So like, what assumptions do you bring into a dance show? What expectations do you have? But I feel like maybe we pretend that we're really doing that about dance, but maybe we're more interested in doing that about women on stage in a lot of ways in our shows.
Mm-hmm. And I feel too, we started this off by talking about like, you're changing the rules, and maybe sometimes the rules, right? And I also almost want to do like air quotes, assumptions are another, you know, synonym for what the rules are. So I'm curious, in addition to gender, what are some of the other assumptions or rules that the running show is challenging or changing?
I mean, I think a big part of it, I think for us, is just sort of what is, you know, the breadth of a dancer's career, and what, you know, what are the sort of values that the field perceives from its performers. You know, I think from coming from not a dance world, I find that dance performers are some of just the most tenacious, brave, wonderful performers that I have worked with. And that's a big generalization, of course, but I think there's such a desire for dancers to perform, and such an awareness that they have of the potential brevity of their career, that there's so much just willingness to really put themselves out there. And I think so much of the show is really trying to honor that. You know, there's a piece that we made. One of the first pieces that we made for the show was in UC Santa Barbara, and it was this really small thing at a rehearsal one day where I had interviewed the cast of the college dancers, and we had this a piece from the Goldberg Variations, and I just sort of put their names, them all saying their names and ages, kind of over the beginning of the music. And then they already had some choreography that they were doing to that music. So then they were going to do it with their names and ages being said in their own voices. And that was it. There was nobody was telling a story. Nobody was like doing some big confessional. It was just say their names, say their ages. And we did that. We ran that piece with that voiceover of everyone saying their name and ages. And then by the end, it was like everyone was in tears. And I was like, what happened. Like to me, it made no sense. I was like, this was not emotional. The emotional stuff is what we will work on after the names and ages will like go into a story. But I think everyone, from what I was hearing, and Wendy Rogers, a wonderful dancer and choreographer and teacher, was with us on that residency, really made me see this so much that dancers don't get a chance to identify themselves. That often you see a dance show and you're trying to figure out afterwards, who was that? Like you have the names of everyone in the program, but you don't necessarily know who did which part, and you have to kind of figure that out. So I think the show is really trying to give the performers an identity in a way that they don't actually get out of so much of their other performing lives. And I feel like that's a really big challenge that I think we're giving ourselves in all of our work, not even just in a documentary sort of quality like the running show has.
That immediately takes me back to that backstory that Monica alluded to. And then this idea that you're changing the rules in that we get to both hear from the dancers and see the dancers. And that is very different for most dance performances. We see them, but we don't always know their backstory. We don't get to hear certainly their ages. But then that also makes me think, just from a form standpoint, if you've ever watched back when there were DVDs and special features on DVDs where you could watch a scene. Maybe it's a scene that was cut from the final, remaster of a production. And because it was cut, it didn't have all of the post-production. So it didn't have a sweeping John Williams score or anything like that. It was just the words. And the way that you've been able to play, not only in elevating and highlighting the words, but then that added level of, well, let's see if we put Goldberg variations behind it. Let's see if we layer this on top of, while they're dancing, or if we get to hear it, side by side. That sounds like it's devised, back to our definition of devised theater, as opposed to something like that most of the time in dance is very, rigorously rehearsed, happens in ephemerality from beginning to end, and there is no going back and seeing if you could play it a different way. Certainly not for the audience's experience. The audience gets to experience it one way from beginning to end. And it sounds like y'all are also changing the rules of time a little bit. Not to put too much pressure on you as time benders, but that's what it's sounding like.
Well, I think sort of back to that idea of really trying to, manipulate seems like such a strong word, or such a heavy-handed idea. But I do feel like so often with the work that we're doing, that we're layering ideas that sort of reveal themselves as the show unfolds, that you don't necessarily see where it's going right away. I think the thing that Robbie said, that there is also just sort of like a push and pull between like the movement and the words. And I think the audience feels that. I feel like there's some parts of the running show and other shows where it's like, we're sort of throwing so much at an audience and knowing that they're going to sort of get a third. I feel like the running show sort of starts off that way, where the density of choreography and the density of language are just like going right at it for the first like 2.5 minutes. And then I think, there's so much of sort of trying to like, in those first 2.5 minutes, really build a sense of like, oh my God, what is the whole show going to be like this? Like, and that's, the dancers are moving so much. And Robbie's speaking with so much excitement, and it just sort of feels like you just saw a whole football game in 2.5 minutes. So I think there's I don't know, I think there's a way that we're in trying to make something that I think feels very spontaneous, and although, as Robbie also said, like we have such totally different impulses in what in what that is, but that we're also really hoping to like lead you towards something that you didn't necessarily see coming when it started. I mean, even just really identifying with a dancer's lives and with a dancer's life and with particular dancers, sort of starting to feel like you're getting to know people in the way that I hope you sort of feel in a play, that you start to get attached to characters and you sort of feel like, oh my, I've similarly said something awkward like that at a big family function, or, you know, I think the show is sort of really drawing you in. And I feel like every show we do is attempting to really, you know, speak to something that feels relatable, and then, you know, just really get you hooked.
I mean, what's often a question with a lot of our dance composition students is like, how do you name something? And I feel, you know, certainly with the Ira Glass show, it was very, you named it exactly. This is what we're doing. The museum workout, you named it. Happy Hour. Tell us a little bit more about the naming of the running show. And maybe this is a Robbie question because it's language focused, but just to give you a break, Monica.
I not to throw it back to Monica so quickly, but I feel like, you know, she's really the one who's doing our titling, I would say. Mostly because she writes them down on these notebooks, and she puts it on. She writes the title on the notebook, and it'll be for like it takes a little while to commit to whether it's the title, and by a little while I mean like 3 to 6 months. And so there's a variety of titles that get written on notebooks, and then a new notebook will show up in rehearsal with like a different title on the front. So I don't know. I think that's, you know, Nora Ephron said this thing that I think about like a lot in our work, that like what you actually have to do is you have to tell the audience what you're about to do, and then you have to do it, and then you have to tell them what you just did. And I don't want to like make Sleepless in Seattle. I have no desire to do that. But I think there's something really useful about that idea when it comes to the way we make shows that involve a really abstract art form. And I think there's plenty of people that make shows that like are just movement for movement's sake, or movement that is really invested in learning something about the way the body works, or, you know, the experience of moving. And that work is amazing. It's just not what we do. And I think the titling in so many ways is to try to tell the audience, like, this is what you're coming to. And it's either like really giving them like a very literal definition of that, or kind of setting them up for something that they expect differently than what we're doing. Like Happy Hour really is, you're coming to a happy hour. You know, the museum workout is actually a workout in a museum. So I think, you know, the titles for us have to have a sense of like the actual event that you're coming to see, and they don't want to be like shiny titles. They just sort of want to seem like it's the real thing that you're coming to. And it's really nice if it also has a sort of poetic meaning towards it as well. As I think like days go by, it feels like so much of that show is watching a day go by in this space, but it also feels like it has more meaning than that.
That, you know, the meaning doesn't have to necessarily hit the audience member over the head, but titles are another form of info sharing. Like, what are you going to hint at? And I think, you know, with any editing or choreography, in writing or in movement making, you know, sometimes you're like, we need to repeat this. And sometimes you're like, once is enough, and we'll see if they pick it up and are done. So I appreciate the logistical as well as the poetic. Is there anything you'd like to add, Monica, about how do you title things and why the running show?
And why the running show? I mean, I think in some ways I just hope that, you know, when people walk away and then a month later they say like, did you see that show? And then, you know, they somehow go like, the one with all the running? Oh yeah, that running show or something. Like, I feel like there's something you want, or like the happy hour feels like, did you see that show that was like an office thing? And then you feel like, yeah, it was like a happy hour. Like somehow the title, I think, just to reiterate what Robbie's saying, like the title wants to feel useful. It's, you know, and if it can be poetic, that feels or feels like, even just combining like the museum workout, just sort of hits those two words together, the museum and the workout, just feel like, kind of a bad idea, but it's interesting, and it's, and similar to, the motto that Robbie coined for the company. It wants to feel memorable.
Where it doesn't, it seems a little fish out of water, that it doesn't belong somehow, that it's going to stick with you for that reason.
Yeah.
Such a treat. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say Happy Hour is always such a funny title because people still call it the Office Party Show instead. And I feel like, I guess we should have done that.
Maybe the office party would have been ourselves turned around. When we were at Jacob's Pillow, they were so like, they loved that it was like an immersive experience, and they really like got behind it so much so that in the marketing it really seemed like it was just come to a happy hour. And people were like, I can be there for the last 15 minutes of your happy hour thing. And we were like, ooh.
Yeah.
No, it definitely has a hard start.
Yeah. It really felt like, that's sort of, we run that risk,
It's such a treat to get to speak with both of you about this. Can't wait to host you in Akron very soon. I am going to go ahead and want to thank some additional friends who made this evening possible, and that includes our funders, and that's public programs and events like these are made possible with additional support by the Ohio Arts Council, the GAR Foundation, and the Akron Community Foundation. And the establishment and general operation of NCCAkron is made possible by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. An extra special thank you to both Monica and Robbie for joining us in this conversation. And I hope that you will be sure to check out their performance when they come to Akron, as presented by Dance Cleveland on Saturday, September 25th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern in E.J. Thomas Hall. You can go to dancecleveland.org for more information and for tickets. If you haven't already, please subscribe to NCC Akron's listserv at nccakron.org. And if you are not in the Akron area, we hope that you will check out Monica Bill Barnes and Company to see when they may be coming to a city near you. And that's at monicabillbarnes.com. Thank you very much and have a great night.